Welcome back to our Hearts of Iron 4 tutorial series. In this next video, we're going to start by taking a look at the summaries at the top of the screen. So looking at these options at the very top, political power is really your ability to affect your country and sometimes other people's countries politically. This accumulates over time, and the rate at which it does so is modified by national spirits, advisors, focuses, events, and lots of other things. This caps out at 2,000, and for the most part you want to spend it rather than letting it sit at that cap, though this really won't be likely until at least mid and probably late game. Stability is really your country's resilience. This affects your political power gain, the output of your factories, and the effectiveness of resistance in territories that you occupy. It's affected by whether you're at war, your ruling party's popularity, and so on. In war, the lower the stability, the easier it is to force a country to capitulate, so be careful getting involved in wars if yours is low, or you might find your government surrendering when you would prefer to keep fighting. Now, war support is how ready your populace is to accept the cost of war. This modifies your military's effectiveness on the battlefield and how much of a penalty to stability you have while you're at war. Your war support is penalized for offensive wars, but that can be countered by propaganda. Manpower is how many people can be recruited into army divisions, crewed onto naval vessels, or made pilots for your air force. If you run out of manpower, your armies, navies, and air wings can't reinforce, and you will eventually lose a war of attrition. Watch out for countries like Russia that can suffer tremendous losses and still fight. Factories shows your total number of factories, as well as how many are military versus civilian. Fuel shows how long until you completely fill or completely deplete your fuel silos. An army without fuel can't move its trucks, trains, tanks, ships, or aircraft and will be drastically less effective. Logistics fulfillment shows how well supplied your military is. Ideally, this is at 100%, as anything less than that directly affects your military's performance. Armies without supply will also eventually die to attrition. Your convoys are the number of ships available to transport goods and troops. If you run out of convoys, you won't be able to receive your goods you're trading for unless there's an overland route through friendly territory. Command power is used to modify your officer corps. You can use this to recruit or promote generals and field marshals and to recruit staff officers. We'll talk about all of that in more details coming up. And experience points for your Army, Navy, and Air Force are used to modify division templates or design new vehicles. You can earn that experience through combat, through military exercises, and through some national focuses. Until you have enough experience, you're stuck with the army that you have. Let's talk about the main buttons. Now, we're using the Color Buttons mod to make it easier to distinguish which buttons are which, but they function the same way without the mod. We're going to go through each one of these from left to right and talk about your various options. So decisions are your reactions to events that affect your country. Some are unique to your country, others apply to everyone. And broadly speaking, these can do things like change your stability, modify your war support, change your economy and trade, and even your ruling political party. Some of them can even form new countries. You can toggle off decisions you don't want to be reminded about, either one at a time or by category, by clicking the green button next to each of them. You can use the next option, Intelligence Agency, to form your own intelligence agency or modify an existing one. We're going to talk about intelligence agencies in their own video, but for now, know that it takes 5 civilian factories for 30 days to create your agency, and you can continue to dedicate 5 factories, create that agency with additional benefits. The Research tab determines what technology your country is currently pursuing. When you finish a research project, you have 30 days to pick a new one without worrying about pausing. All that accumulated time will apply to the next research project that you select. And just like focus trees, you can scroll with your mouse. There's 2 broad types of research projects. Those with square boxes offer modifiers to your existing technology, while those with rectangular boxes open up new items to be produced by your factories or dockyards. At the top of each research tab is a year in which the technology is likely to be acquired historically. Picking research projects that are not normally available for years applies an ahead-of-time penalty that drastically slows your research. Some focuses, decisions, events, or even doctrines can give you bonuses to research and/or reductions to these ahead-of-time penalties to make it easier to gain a technological advantage over your enemies. And some research projects have small icons in the upper right corner that you can pursue to unlock variants, such as motorized rocket artillery or super heavy battleships. So what should you pick? Well, the number of each research project that you can pursue simultaneously varies by country and national focus, so it depends on what you're trying to achieve on the world stage. That being said, you can rarely go wrong with dedicating 2 of your research projects to infantry and industry respectively. Here's a rundown of what each of those projects actually mean. The Support Companies tab offers research projects that improve your divisions to which they're assigned. Each support company requires you to produce support equipment to use and also requires experience to assign to a division. Engineering improves your Army's entrenchment and defense, and eventually allows you to create makeshift bridges, design flamethrower tanks, and so on. Recon improves your ability to see enemy armies and your organization as you prepare for those enemies. Military police improves the abilities of your armies to garrison occupied territories, and these are really only needed in dedicated garrison templates, which we'll talk about later. Maintenance companies keep your equipment reliable and provide a 5% or more bonus to anything with reliability in that division. This can offset some reliability penalties due to enemy units, weather, terrain, or other events. Everything under the truck in this section requires trucks to use in addition to support equipment. Field hospitals reduce the losses your armies face in battle by having troops trickle back to the front lines rather than having to be replaced. Logistics companies reduce your supply usage but increase your fuel usage. And signals companies improve your division's initiatives. For new players, you can focus on engineering and recon companies, and everything else can come later. At the very bottom of the Support Companies tab are the trains. Civilian trains move supplies along railways. War austerity trains are cheaper to produce but very vulnerable to enemy bombing. Armored trains are the exact opposite. And railway guns allow you to support land attacks with bombardment, similar to how battleships can support a naval invasion, provided you have access to a rail line close enough. Armor research includes new tank chassis in the center, as well as armor and engine modifiers on the sides. Each new tank chassis modifies the base stats of tanks using that chassis in their design. And a few, like the amphibious tank chassis, provide unique bonuses as well. Artillery research provides new weapons and bonuses for existing weapons. Regular artillery is highly effective against leg and motorized infantry. Anti-air weapons can be included in divisions, built in states, or even be added to tank or ship designs and provide significant bonuses against enemy air wings. Anti-tank weapons are effective against heavily armored targets, but are often only useful if you're not producing tanks yourself. For example, a small country without the resources needed to support armored divisions. Naval research is similar to armor in that it contains projects for new hulls as well as modifiers. However, the modifiers in this tab are often linked to specific ship classes, depth charges on destroyers, for example. Naval support research includes new options for your ship designs and passive bonuses to those options. In the early game, these are generally not necessary. However, by mid-game, your navy can live or die based on the equipment on your ships. A couple of things to highlight here are the dual-purpose batteries, beginning in 1939, that allow one equipment slot to provide utility against enemy ships and aircraft, as well as the transport section towards the bottom. The transports increase the number of divisions that can participate in a naval invasion, and provide other options like floating harbors that we can talk about later on. For new players, you can largely ignore mine warfare as it requires dedicated ship designs to engage in effectively. Against the AI, you're often, though not always, better off simply replacing your losses rather than dedicating resources to minesweeping and laying mines. Air research includes new airframes like tank chassis and ship hulls that can be used in the aircraft designer, as well as weaponry and engines for those airframes. Small airframes are used for fighters and close air support, medium for tactical bombers and naval bombers, and large airframes for strategic bombers. On the engineering research, that's broken into two separate trees, and new players can pretty much ignore the rightmost tree until you're regularly making it to 1940 with research slots and resources to spare. Nukes and rockets are going to be covered in their own video. On the leftmost tree, this engineering is also broken into two branches. The left side unlocks radar and radio. Both are critical for communicating with troops in the field and spotting enemy divisions and aircraft, and the right side improves your speed at research. In most of your games, you don't need to go past radar on the left side of the screen unless you're playing a country that's heavily involved in air or naval warfare like Japan. Finally, the infrastructure tree directly affects how quickly you extract resources, construct buildings, and produce military equipment. Neglecting this tab can allow an enemy to outpace your production and win a war of attrition by replacing its losses faster than you can. You should almost always have one of your research slots working on a project from this tab. To engage in diplomacy with another country, you can use the diplomacy button, with the country selected, or simply right-click them from the default map mode. And as we saw previously, there's a number of options for interacting with them depending on your existing relationship and world events. Justifying, declaring, and joining wars will be covered separately, but for the rest of these interactions, offering military access or docking rights allows you to have a country move its troops through your territory or extend its reach to naval regions from your ports as well as their own. Asking for those rights gives you the same in their country. Improving relations improves what that country thinks of you. This generally makes it easier for you to use other interactions with them. When a country's at war, you can send attaché to assign them a military advisor. You get some military intelligence from that country, as well as a portion of their military experience and a boost to your war support. The target country in exchange gets a bonus to its division's organization and planning speed, both of which will be covered in a section on waging war later. Non-aggression pacts are used to agree with a country that you will not declare war on each other. Breaking this agreement is usually bad because it has significant penalties to your relations with other countries and your own stability, and is really only possible by being called into the war as an ally or through a national focus, as this disables the justify war goal and declare war options with that country. Create faction or invite to faction allows you to create one if you're not already a member, or invite someone into a faction if you're the faction leader. This is often limited by your national focuses, your ideology, the target's ideology, and world tension. Requesting license production or negotiating licenses is really how you give permission or ask for permission to produce equipment from another country. That gives a bonus to researching that technology and allows you to produce things that you wouldn't normally have access to based on the target country's technology in exchange for some of your civilian factories. Starting a Lend-Lease sends equipment to a non-enemy country that's currently at war. This can be a one-time offer, or it can be monthly, and really it's a good way to use your outdated equipment your country is sitting on in the stockpiles by sending it to an ally that might need it. Any gun is always better than no gun. Issuing trade embargoes prevents that country from trading with you at all. This is really powerful for countries that control rare and important resources like oil and rubber. Sending volunteers allows you to send a small number of divisions to a target country if they're at war and you're not. You control those units, but they remain in the target country until the war ends. Expeditionary forces are similar, but they allow you to transfer as many units as you want to a faction member fighting in a war with you. The target country then controls those units as their own. Return expeditions returns those expeditionary forces back to your country. Requesting garrison support allows you to ask for manpower to help guard your occupied territories. And guarantee independence allows you to make a pledge that you'll join any war against the target on their side, and they will automatically join your faction. Watch out for major countries guaranteeing smaller ones that you might otherwise be able to defeat easily, as you can quickly escalate a war beyond your ability to win. Producing equipment requires certain resources, and not having enough dramatically decreases the speed at which they're produced. If you don't produce enough on your own, as affected by your trade law, you'll need to trade your civilian factories to other countries at a rate of 8 resources per factory, or 80 if they're a vassal. Pay attention to the number of resources a country has to offer, as they can only export up to this amount, even if you have the factories to offer for more. It's important to note here that if you use your very last available civilian factory for trade, all of your construction will pause. This is almost never a good idea. One thing that is not shown as a trade deficit in the notifications is fuel. You can request fuel the same way and compare your trade to your current or maximum consumption by looking at the numbers in the needed row for fuel. In order to do a trade, you simply pick the target country and select how many factories you want to exchange for how many resources, and then click Send. For construction, you can select the option you want to add to a state or province. Click once to add one of that building. Shift-click to add the maximum amount possible. Right-click to remove one, or Shift-right-click to remove all of them. Construction speed is based on your number of available civilian factories and the infrastructure in the target state or province. Building infrastructure affects the speed at which any other buildings are constructed, the number of resources extracted, and the organization of divisions moving through that state. Air bases are military airfields from which your air wings can launch missions. Since each air wing has a maximum range, building these near enemy territory can make it much easier to use your air power there. Anti-air is exactly what it sounds like, emplacements of anti-aircraft weaponry that will make it more difficult for your enemy to project their air power into your territory. Radar detects enemy forces, especially incoming aircraft. They can also spot ships at sea and increase your overall intelligence in other countries. Military factories produce equipment needed by your divisions. Civilian factories are used for construction and traded for resources. Naval dockyards produce ships for your fleets, and synthetic refineries produce fuel and rubber. Fuel silos store fuel, and having more stored fuel can protect against trade embargoes by nations that do produce it. Rocket sites can produce and launch 1 rocket per day, and nuclear reactors provide 1 nuclear bomb per year. You can use the convert option to switch military factories to civilian ones or vice versa if you need to quickly change the balance in a province. This is a significant time savings over building new factories from scratch, and may be your only option if you have no more building slots available. Supply hubs are where supplies move from railways or ports out to divisions by truck. Railways move supplies between hubs over land. Naval bases move supplies between ports and repair ships. And your land and coastal forts provide province-level defense against enemy divisions. That's going to do it for this episode, and our next one will pick up with production and recruiting and deploying. We'll eventually start to talk about officer corps as well, and then from there we'll carry on into what all of these various notifications at the top of your screen mean.